The air in the anchor and chain was a thick, layered thing, a sedimentary history of the men who haunted its perpetually damp corners. The lowest layer, clinging to the sticky floorboards, was the scent of stale beer and spilled whiskey, a permanent ghost of last night's revelry and every night's before it. Above that hung the sharp, metallic tang of ozone from the sputtering neon sign over the bar, mingling with the heavy, greasy perfume of fried food that seeped from the kitchen like a slow oil leak. The highest layer, stirred by the lazy rotation of a ceiling fan that did little more than rearrange the gloom, was a miasma of sea salt, diesel fumes from the nearby piers, and the faint, almost imperceptible odor of wet wool and masculine sweat. It was a place built of grit and noise, a sanctuary for sailors and Marines seeking refuge from the rigid geometry of military life, a place where the lines of rank blurred just enough to be comfortable, but never enough to be forgotten. The soundscape was a low roar, the clatter of thick glass mugs, the percussive crack of billiard balls, the drone of a sports commentator on a corner television, and overarching it all, the constant, rumbling bass line of male laughter and boasting. She sat alone in a booth in the darkest corner, a small island of stillness in the turbulent sea of the bar. She had been there for nearly an hour, nursing a single glass of water, a worn, leather-bound book open before her. She was profoundly unnoticeable, a masterwork of anonymity. Her clothes were simple, functional civilian wear, dark gray trousers, a plain black long-sleeved shirt that seemed chosen specifically to deflect attention. Her hair was a nondescript brown, pulled back in a severe, functional bun that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her features but offered no hint of vanity. She was not old, nor was she young. She occupied that indeterminate age where life had etched lines of thought around her eyes, but had not yet softened the firm set of her jaw. She did not fidget. She did not look at her phone. Her posture was perfect, a study in relaxed readiness, her spine straight against the worn vinyl of the booth. She would read a page of her book, her eyes moving with a steady, methodical rhythm, and then she would lift her gaze, her focus shifting to the middle distance as she processed the information. She was not a part of the bar's ecosystem. She was an observer, a scientist studying a foreign habitat, her calm a stark, silent rebuke to the clamor around her. Into this carefully curated environment of masculine energy strode Sergeant Rex Malloy, a man who moved as if the world were a space he was entitled to conquer. He was not an exceptionally large man, but he projected a physical presence that filled a room, an aura of coiled, aggressive confidence honed in the crucible of Paris Island and burnished in the deserts of 2 deployments. His uniform, the Marine Corps Combat Utility uniform, with the sleeves rolled to a perfect tight band around his biceps, was immaculate. His face, a landscape of sharp angles and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from naval tradition itself, was set in a permanent expression of belligerent certainty. He was flanked by 2 younger Marines, corporals who orbited him like eager moons, their own confidence a pale reflection of his brilliant sun. Malloy was the undisputed king of this particular bar, at this particular time of day. His authority was not derived from the silver chevrons on his collar, but from the sheer, unadulterated force of his personality. Authority radiated from him like heat from a furnace, and the other patrons, sailors and Marines alike, parted before him, offering nods of deference and respect. Malloy's eyes, honed by years of scanning horizons for threats, swept the room with a proprietary air. He saw the familiar faces, the expected patterns of behavior, the comfortable rhythm of his domain. And then he saw her, the woman in the corner, an anomaly, a disruption in the pattern. In his world, things were sorted into neat, identifiable boxes: Marine, sailor, civilian contractor, local. She fit none of them. She was a civilian, clearly, but she sat with the stillness of a predator, not the nervous energy of an outsider. Her presence was an unanswered question, and Sergeant Malloy did not tolerate unanswered questions in his territory. It was an affront, a small tear in the fabric of his world that he felt a primal urge to mend or to rip wider. He watched her for a moment, his lip curling into a sneer. She was reading a book in his bar. The audacity of it was almost amusing. He saw her as a misplaced academic, a lost tourist who had wandered into a place she did not belong. His corporals, sensing their leader's focus shifting, followed his gaze. One of them snickered. "Looks like somebody's lost, Sergeant." Malloy grinned, a predatory flash of white teeth. "Let's go help her find her way out." He moved toward her booth, not like a man approaching a stranger, but like a demolition expert approaching a suspicious package. It was a slow, deliberate saunter, each step heavy with intent. The ambient noise of the bar seemed to dip slightly as he closed the distance, the patrons sensing the shift in the social weather. A confrontation was brewing, and it was always better to be a spectator than a participant. He stopped beside her table, casting a long shadow over her and the pages of her book. She did not look up. She continued to read, her focus absolute, as if he were nothing more than a passing cloud. This, more than anything, stoked the fire of his indignation. He was a sergeant of the United States Marine Corps. He was used to being seen. He was used to being acknowledged. Her deliberate indifference was a calculated insult. "This isn't a library, ma'am," he said, his voice a low growl designed to carry. It was not a suggestion. It was an accusation. She finished her paragraph, her eyes moving to the final word on the page. Only then did she lift her head, her gaze meeting his. Her eyes were a cool, clear gray, and they held no fear, no surprise, no deference. They held only a placid, analytical curiosity, as if she were examining a mildly interesting specimen of insect. "I'm aware of that, Sergeant," she replied, her voice quiet but carrying a strange resonance, a quality of absolute clarity that cut through the bar's low hum. She had identified his rank with a single, fleeting glance at his collar, a detail he missed in his own assessment of her. The simple, factual response disarmed him for a fraction of a second. He had expected a flustered apology, a nervous explanation. He had not expected calm, factual acknowledgement. It felt like punching a fog bank. He pressed on, his ego demanding satisfaction. "This is a military bar, a place for warriors to unwind. You're taking up a booth that a real Marine could be using." The implication was clear. The insult laid bare for his audience of corporals and the other listening patrons. "You do not belong. You are not one of us." She did not flinch. She did not turn. Her gaze remained locked on his, her expression unchanging. "This establishment is open to all personnel with proper base access. I have proper base access." Her statement was delivered with the flat, emotionless precision of a legal deposition. There was no anger in her tone, no defensiveness. It was a simple declaration of fact, and its very simplicity was enraging. She was refusing to play the game, refusing to accept the role he had assigned her as the intimidated civilian. One of his corporals, emboldened by his sergeant's aggression, chimed in with a sneer. "Base access? What are you, some kind of pencil-pushing GS5 secretary from the admin building?" Malloy chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on her table, invading her personal space. The scent of his cheap cologne and the faint odor of smokeless tobacco washed over her. "Listen, lady. I don't know who you are, but you've got a certain vibe. It's messing with the atmosphere in here. So why don't you take your book and your glass of water and go find a coffee shop to read in? This is a place for drinking, for laughing, for being loud." He punctuated his statement by deliberately knocking her book with the side of his hand. It slid across the table and fell to the sticky floor with a soft thud. The bar fell silent. The line had been crossed. This was no longer posturing. It was a physical act of disrespect. Everyone watched her, waiting for the inevitable reaction. Tears, a panicked retreat, a shrill protest. They waited for her to crumble, to validate Malloy's dominance. She did none of those things. Her eyes flickered down to the book on the floor, then back up to his face. A flicker of something cold and ancient passed through her gray eyes, a momentary glint of polished steel. For the first time, a sliver of doubt, thin as a razor's edge, tried to work its way into Sergeant Malloy's mind, but he crushed it with a fresh wave of arrogant certainty. He had this situation under control. She was just a stubborn woman who needed to be put in her place. Slowly, with a grace that was almost unnerving, she slid out of the booth. She bent down, her movements economical and precise, and picked up her book. She brushed a speck of dirt from its cover with a deliberate sweep of her thumb. Then, she straightened up, placed the book back in the center of the table, and looked directly at Sergeant Malloy. "You have a discipline problem with your men, Sergeant," she said, her voice still unnervingly calm. "And you have a problem with situational awareness." She wasn't shouting. She wasn't threatening. She was diagnosing him, like a physician informing a patient of a terminal illness. The clinical precision of her words was more infuriating than any curse could have been. He felt a surge of hot rage. Who was this woman to lecture him on discipline? Him? A combat veteran, a leader of Marines? He took a step closer, puffing out his chest, his face turning a blotchy red. "You have no idea who you're talking to, lady." "And that," she replied, her voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper, "is the entire problem." She sat back down in her booth, opened her book to her marked page, and began to read again, dismissing him as completely and utterly as one would dismiss a fly. He was left standing there, his rage a useless, impotent thing. He had been outmaneuvered, his aggression absorbed and deflected by her impossible calm. He had been made to look foolish. His corporals looked at him, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning embarrassment. The entire bar was watching. He had to reassert control. He was about to reach for her book again, to tear it from her hands, to force a reaction, when the world outside the bar's grimy windows decided to end. It began not with a bang, but with a sudden, violent drop in pressure that made everyone's ears pop. The low hum of the bar was instantly swallowed by a sound that was not a sound at all, but a physical presence. A deep, guttural roar that seemed to come from the throat of the ocean itself. The thick glass windows of the anchor and chain bowed inward, a spiderweb of cracks instantly appearing as they fought a battle against physics they were destined to lose. Then they shattered, exploding inward in a shower of crystalline shrapnel. A wall of wind and rain, a solid horizontal thing, blasted into the bar, tearing pictures from the walls, sending glasses and bottles crashing to the floor. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the room into a terrifying wind-whipped twilight. Panic erupted. The carefully constructed hierarchy of the bar dissolved into primal fear. Men who had faced enemy fire overseas were reduced to shouting, stumbling figures in the gloom. The roar of the wind was deafening, a physical assault that made thought impossible. It was a derecho, a sudden, ferociously powerful squall line that had materialized over the naval base with almost no warning. A meteorological ambush. Sergeant Malloy, caught completely off guard, reacted on instinct. He began to bellow orders, but his voice was swallowed by the storm. "Get down! Stay away from the windows!" His commands were textbook, the product of training, but in the face of this elemental fury, they were laughably inadequate. He was shouting into a hurricane, a man trying to command the tide. His authority, which had seemed so absolute moments before, was revealed to be a fragile, circumstantial thing. It had no purchase here. Through the shattered window, a nightmare scene was unfolding on the pier. The USS Agincourt, a brand-new billion-dollar experimental destroyer, was straining at its moorings. It was a ghost ship in the maelstrom, its high-tech composite hull gleaming wetly in the chaotic flashes of emergency lights that had just begun to strobe across the base. The wind, screaming at over 80 knots, was pushing the full broadside of the massive vessel directly against the concrete pier. The thick 10-inch mooring lines, designed to withstand immense forces, were stretched to their breaking point, groaning with a sound like tearing metal. They looked like steel cables, but they were in fact advanced synthetic ropes, and under the incredible strain, they began to sing a high, terrifying note of imminent failure. Then it happened. With a crack that was louder than a cannon shot, a sound that cut through even the howl of the wind, the forward bowline snapped. The severed end, thick as a man's thigh, whipped through the air with lethal velocity, smashing a cargo crane to pieces before plunging into the churning water. The Agincourt's bow immediately began to swing away from the pier, pivoting on its remaining lines. It was a catastrophic failure cascade in the making. The stern lines, now taking on a load they were never designed to bear, began to smoke from the friction against the ship's bollards. In moments, they too would snap, and the destroyer, a masterpiece of naval engineering, would be at the mercy of the storm, destined to be smashed against the pier or driven aground, causing untold millions in damage and potentially rupturing its fuel tanks, creating an environmental disaster. On the pier, chaos reigned. A small damage control party, caught in the open, was struggling, their movements clumsy and panicked in the face of the storm's power. They were shouting, but their words were lost. They were trying to deploy emergency lines, but it was like trying to thread a needle in an earthquake. Sergeant Malloy, watching from the wrecked bar, felt a surge of helpless fury. He was a man of action, but there was no action to be taken. He could charge out there, but what could he do? He was a Marine infantry sergeant. He knew rifles and tactics, not naval engineering and catastrophic mooring failures. His brand of authority, the kind that worked on the battlefield and in bars, was useless here. He and his men were just as much spectators as anyone else, frozen by a problem that was simply too big, too technical, too fast. And then, in the heart of the chaos, a new vector of motion appeared. It was the woman, the quiet one from the corner. While everyone else was cowering or shouting, she had moved. She wasn't running or panicking. She was flowing through the debris-strewn bar with an eerie, liquid grace, her movements purposeful and devoid of any wasted energy. She reached the shattered window frame and paused for a single, breathtaking second, her body utterly still as she absorbed the entire chaotic scene on the pier. Her eyes were not wide with fear. They were narrowed in intense concentration, scanning the ship, the lines, the wind, the water. She was not seeing a disaster. She was seeing a complex, multivariable physics problem, and she was solving it. She turned from the window, her face a mask of cold, absolute command. The meek, unassuming civilian was gone. In her place stood something else entirely, something ancient and formidable. Authority, true authority, poured from her, a silent, gravitational force that bent the chaos around her into a shape she desired. She fixed her gaze on Sergeant Malloy, and for the first time, he felt a genuine spike of fear. Her gray eyes seemed to see right through him, to weigh and measure the very substance of his soul and find it wanting. "You!" she barked, and her voice was a weapon. It was not loud, but it possessed a quality of command that sliced through the roar of the storm like a diamond blade through glass. Every Marine and sailor in the room, conditioned by years of training to respond to that specific tone, flinched and turned toward her. "Sergeant, get me a radio, a working one, base command frequency, now." Malloy, stunned into instinctive obedience, could only stammer, Who are you?" She took a step toward him, and he actually recoiled. "I am the person who is going to stop that ship from becoming a billion-dollar reef. Your name and my identity are irrelevant. What is relevant is the tensile strength of a 6-inch braided polypropylene line under dynamic torsional load. Do you have a radio, or are you just a decoration?" The sheer, baffling specificity of her words, the foreign language of expertise, short-circuited his brain. One of his corporals, his face pale with shock, shoved a tactical radio into his hands. Malloy fumbled with it, his fingers suddenly clumsy. He handed it to her. She took it without a word of thanks, her fingers flying across the keypad with practiced familiarity. She keyed the microphone. "Any station this net, this is an emergency transmission. This is call sign Chimera. I am declaring a condition Zulu engineering casualty at Pier 4. I am assuming tactical command of the scene." There was a moment of static. Then a panicked voice from the base operations center crackled back. "Unidentified station, you are on a command net. Identify yourself immediately. Condition Zulu is not authorized." She cut him off, her voice dropping into a register of pure, icy authority. "This is not a request. I am Dr. Aris Thorne. Run my name. You have 10 seconds before I start issuing orders that will be followed without your consent." The Agincourt's primary stern line, number 4, is experiencing catastrophic fiber abrasion at the fairlead. It has less than 90 seconds to failure. Get me the port operations chief on this channel, and get me a direct line to the bridge of the tugboat Hercules. Do it now. A new voice, deeper and laced with stunned comprehension, came over the radio. "Dr. Thorne, this is Master Chief Williams. Port Ops. Confirmed. We show you on sabbatical. The channel is yours. Hercules is standing by." The Master Chief's voice was filled with a reverence that bordered on awe. She never took her eyes off the pier. "Hercules, this is Chimera. What is your current position and state of readiness?" A calm, professional voice responded instantly. "Chimera, Hercules is 100 meters off your port quarter. Full power available." "Copy, Hercules," she said, her voice a staccato burst of commands. "Execute emergency maneuver plan Delta 79er. I want you to put your bow perpendicular to the Agincourt's stern, starboard side. You will use your thrusters to apply controlled pressure directly to frame 225, aft of the primary propeller shaft. You will not push. You will absorb. Your job is to counteract the stern's lateral swing the moment line 4 parts. Acknowledge." "Acknowledged, Chimera. Executing Delta 79er." The powerful tugboat, which had been holding its position in the churning harbor, began to move with new purpose, a sheepdog responding to its master's whistle. She then turned her attention back to the room. Her gaze swept over the frozen faces of the Marines and sailors. "I need runners. You and you," she said, pointing to Malloy's two corporals. "Find the pier's damage control locker. There is a hydraulic cable tensioner inside. It's a Peterson Model 7. It's yellow and it weighs 200 pounds. Get it. Bring it to the base of the number 2 mooring capstan. Move!" The two young Marines, galvanized by the sheer certainty in her voice, sprinted out into the storm without a second's hesitation, their earlier arrogance replaced by the wide-eyed focus of true believers. Then she looked at Malloy. He was still standing there, a useless statue, the entire foundation of his world crumbling beneath him. She wasn't mocking him. She wasn't gloating. She was simply using him as a resource, a tool to be deployed. "Sergeant," she said, her voice sharp and clinical. "The damage control party on the pier is panicking. They're about to try and attach a new line to the primary stern bollard dole. If they do that while it's under load, the recoil from the inevitable snap will kill them all. I need you to get out there. You will not touch any equipment. You are a communications relay. You will take this earpiece and you will repeat my instructions to their senior petty officer, verbatim. Do you understand me?" He could only nod, his throat suddenly dry. He, Rex Wrecker Malloy, the brawler, the leader of men, had been reduced to a messenger boy, and he was grateful for it. He took the small radio earpiece she offered him and sprinted out into the howling wind, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a strange, unfamiliar sense of purpose. He was no longer in charge, and the relief was overwhelming. He was a cog in a machine being operated by a master. For the next 10 minutes, Dr. Eris Thorne conducted a symphony of salvation from the shattered window of a dockside bar. She stood amidst the broken glass and debris, one hand holding the radio, the other occasionally making small, precise gestures in the air, as if physically molding the events outside to her will. She was a conductor, and her orchestra was a collection of tugboats, panicked sailors, powerful hydraulic machinery, and the fundamental laws of physics. Her voice never wavered, a calm, steady stream of impossibly complex instructions that flowed from her with the ease of breathing. "Master Chief," she said into the radio, "the wind shear is creating a Venturi effect between the superstructure and Warehouse B. We have a fluctuating low-pressure zone. Tell Hercules to anticipate a 10-degree yaw to starboard in 30 seconds. He needs to compensate with portside thrusters, 20% power." She spoke of forces no one else could see, of effects no one else could predict. She was playing a 3-dimensional chess game against the storm, and she was 10 moves ahead. Through Malloy's earpiece, she guided the frantic sailors on the pier, her voice a lifeline of calm expertise in the maelstrom. "Tell the petty officer to ignore the primary bollard. He needs to secure a new line to the secondary mooring cleat. Use a double figure 8 bend. It will hold. The sheer strength of the cleat's welds is rated for this exact load, provided the angle of force is kept below 15 degrees. I will keep it there." Just as she spoke, the groaning from the stern of the Agincourt reached a fever pitch. With a final explosive bang, the number 4 line parted. The massive destroyer's stern, now free, lurched violently away from the pier. A collective gasp went up from everyone watching. But the catastrophe they expected never came. The tugboat Hercules, already in position, thanks to her foresight, met the swinging hull with a gentle, perfectly modulated cushion of force from its thrusters. The ship's momentum was arrested, its wild swing tamed into a slow, controlled drift. At the same moment, the team on the pier, guided by her instructions, successfully secured the emergency line. The two corporals arrived with the massive tensioner, and with her precise commands relayed through Malloy, the damage control team began the arduous process of slowly, carefully winching the billion-dollar warship back against the pier, taming the beast one agonizing inch at a time. The storm began to abate almost as quickly as it had arrived. The wind's shriek softened to a howl, then a moan, then a whisper. The rain lessened. A fragile, watery sunlight began to break through the bruised-looking clouds. The immediate crisis was over. The USS Agincourt, while still in a precarious position, was secure. The pier was a wreck, but the ship was safe. In the bar, a stunned silence had fallen. Everyone was staring at the woman. She stood, seemingly unfazed, still calmly issuing final instructions into the radio, coordinating the relief efforts. Sergeant Malloy stumbled back inside, drenched and shaking, his face a mask of utter disbelief. He looked at her not as a woman, not as a civilian, but as something utterly beyond his comprehension. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? It was at that moment that the recognizer arrived. The doors to the bar, or what was left of them, were flung open, and in strode a figure that commanded instant, absolute respect. He was a rear admiral, his uniform crisp and adorned with a chest full of ribbons that told the story of a long and distinguished career. His face was a craggy landscape of authority, his eyes sharp and intelligent. It was Admiral Carrick, the base commander himself. He was flanked by a coterie of aides and master chiefs who scrambled to keep up with his determined stride. He swept the scene of destruction with a grim expression, his eyes finally landing on the woman with the radio. Every sailor and marine in the room instinctively snapped to attention, their bodies rigid, their training taking over, all except Sergeant Malloy, who was still too deep in shock to react. Admiral Carrick's eyes flickered to him, a brief flash of annoyance before locking back onto the woman. His grim expression melted away, replaced by one of profound relief and something else. Deference. "Dr. Thorne," he boomed, his voice filling the room. He did not ask what she was doing there. He did not question her authority. He walked directly to her and stopped a respectful 2 feet away. "Aris, my God. We logged your emergency declaration. What's the status of my ship?" She lowered the radio, her work finally done. "She's stable, Admiral. Minimal hull scraping, but the primary mooring systems will need a complete overhaul. Your port operations team responded admirably once given proper direction." Her tone was that of a senior officer debriefing a subordinate. The Admiral nodded, a look of immense gratitude on his face. "I have no doubt. I heard the comms chatter. You saved us from a catastrophe of epic proportions." He then seemed to notice the entire room for the first time, seeing the assembled sailors and marines standing ramrod straight. His eyes narrowed. He took a deep breath, and his voice became a thunderclap of command that shook the very foundations of the building. "Attention on deck!" The command was a formality, but it was a powerful one. It was the ultimate public validation. An admiral, the supreme authority on the base, was calling the room to attention for a civilian woman in a plain black shirt. He was officially acknowledging her superior status in this context. He held the salute for a moment, a gesture of profound respect, before turning his gaze, now as cold and hard as a glacier, directly onto the still frozen Sergeant Rex Malloy. "Sergeant," the Admiral said, his voice dangerously quiet. I am told that just before the storm hit, you were interacting with Dr. Thorne. Is that correct? Malloy finally found his voice. It was a weak, pathetic croak. Sir. Yes, sir. The narrator's voice would later describe this moment as the bomb finally landing. For the men in the room, the name Dr. Thorne had been a confusing piece of data. Now the Admiral was about to provide the context. So let me be clear, Sergeant, Carrick continued, his voice dripping with contempt. You, a Marine E5, decided it was your place to harass the woman who holds a civilian rank equivalent to a 4-star general. You decided to spill the book of Dr. Eris Thorne, the lead design architect of the Agincourt-class destroyer. The very ship she just saved. The woman who literally wrote the book on asymmetrical naval warfare and catastrophic systems failure. The woman whose call sign, Chimera, is spoken with fear in the intelligence communities of our enemies and with reverence in the halls of the Pentagon. Have I summarized the situation correctly, Sergeant? Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling Sergeant Malloy's entire world, his ego, his identity. He could not speak. He could only stand there, his face ashen, as the full, horrifying weight of his ignorance and arrogance crashed down upon him. The room was utterly silent, save for the dripping of rain and the distant whine of emergency sirens. He had not just mocked a civilian. He had danced like a foolish jackal at the edge of a lioness's kill radius, utterly oblivious to the mortal danger he was in. The Admiral looked as if he was about to personally tear the chevrons from Malloy's collar. He opened his mouth to deliver the sentence, but Dr. Thorne held up a single, slender hand. With all due respect, Admiral, she said, her voice once again quiet and calm, that won't be necessary. Carrick turned to her, his expression softening. Eris, this man showed you a profound lack of respect. His behavior was a disgrace to his uniform. No, Admiral, she corrected him gently. He demonstrated a critical failure in threat assessment and a complete lack of situational awareness. He defaulted to a pattern of behavior based on flawed, superficial data. He saw a woman, a civilian, and his training failed him. He did not see a potential asset. He did not gather intelligence before acting. From a tactical standpoint, his failure was absolute. She turned her cool, analytical gaze back to Malloy. She was not angry. She was a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. Punishing him under the UCMJ would be inefficient. It would teach him to fear authority. It would not teach him to recognize it in its various forms. Fear is a poor long-term motivator. She looked back at the Admiral. I have a request. I'm stateside for the next 6 months, overseeing the Agincourt's shakedown crews and systems integration. I require a military liaison, someone to handle my schedules, coordinate my security, and act as a general aide. I believe Sergeant Malloy is uniquely qualified for the position. A slow, cold understanding dawned on Admiral Carrick's face, followed by a cruel, thin smile. It was a punishment far more devastating and educational than any brig time could ever be. She was not going to have him broken. She was going to have him re-educated. He would spend every waking moment for the next 6 months in her shadow, a forced witness to the quiet, terrifying competence he had so casually dismissed. He would carry her briefcase. He would fetch her coffee. And he would listen as she discussed quantum computing with admirals and debated metallurgical stress tolerances with engineers. His punishment was to be proximity to greatness, a constant, unending reminder of his own catastrophic failure of judgment. Your request is granted, Doctor, the Admiral said, the smile never leaving his lips. He turned to the ghost-white sergeant. Sergeant Malloy, You are hereby assigned to Dr. Thorne's personal staff, effective immediately. You will obey her every order as if it came from me. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Malloy whispered, the words tasting like ash. The story of that day passed into the permanent lore of the naval base. It became a modern fable, a teaching tool passed down from salty master chiefs to raw recruits. They called it the day the sergeant met the dragon, or sometimes Wrecker's Reckoning. The details grew more embellished with each telling. The storm became a Category 5 hurricane. Dr. Thorne was said to have calculated the ship's drift by tasting the salt in the air. Malloy was said to have wept openly. But the core of the story, the essential truth of it, remained unchanged. It was a lesson, burned into the institutional memory of the base, about the profound danger of assumption. Years passed. Sergeant Rex Malloy never became the sergeant major he had once dreamed of being. His path was irrevocably altered, but he did not break. The 6 months he spent as Dr. Thorne's liaison did not humiliate him into oblivion. It reforged him. He saw a kind of strength he never knew existed, a quiet, intellectual power that could move fleets and change the course of history without ever raising its voice. He learned that true authority wasn't projected. It was possessed. It was a quality of being, not an act of doing. He learned humility, a lesson taught not with a fist, but with a quiet, patient, and unending demonstration of sheer, unassailable competence. A decade later, Master Gunnery Sergeant Rex Malloy stood before a class of newly promoted sergeants at the Marine Corps Staff Non-Commissioned Officer Academy. He was a different man. The arrogant fire in his eyes had been replaced by the steady, knowing calm of a man who had looked into the abyss of his own ignorance and survived. He was now one of the most respected and effective instructors at the academy, known for his unconventional but powerful lessons on leadership. He stood before his class and began his favorite lecture. "Your greatest strength as a leader," he said, his voice a low rumble that commanded attention, "is not your voice. It is not your physical presence. It is your ability to accurately assess a situation, to see what is there, not what you expect to be there." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Today, I'm going to tell you a story about a time I failed that test. A time I let my ego and my assumptions lead me to the single greatest mistake of my career. It's a story about a dockside bar, a book, a glass of water, and the quietest, most dangerous person I have ever met." And he would tell them the story of Dr. Eris Thorne, using his own humiliation as the ultimate cautionary tale. He taught his students to look for the quiet ones, to listen to the person who isn't speaking, to understand that the most formidable weapon in any room is often the mind you cannot see working. The ultimate moral of this story, the lesson that echoed from the halls of that academy to the steel corridors of ships at sea, is a simple and timeless one. True strength does not need to announce itself. Competence does not require validation from the ignorant. Authority is not about the volume of your voice, but the weight of your knowledge. In a world that is often loud, chaotic, and obsessed with superficial displays of power, the greatest force is often the one that is most underestimated. It is the quiet professional, the hidden master, the unassuming mind that sees the world not as it appears, but as it truly is, a complex system of forces and variables waiting to be understood and commanded. The story of Sergeant Malloy and Dr. Thorne serves as a permanent, indelible reminder. Let your actions be your argument. For in the end, when the storm comes, it is not the loudest voice that will save you. It is the calmest mind.